Hello, welcome. My name is Brendan. Welcome to Central Park. We're so excited that you're joining us today for Behind the Park, Maintaining Central Park's Expansive Lawns. This is the fourth part in our six-part series, and each program explores a different facet of the Conservancy's work, featuring the individuals who do that work. And with these programs, we're taking you behind the scenes to learn about the ins and outs of park management and design and restoration. And we've already explored statues and monuments, rustic architecture, and the restoration of Central Park's historic dairy. And so if you missed any of those, you can catch them on our YouTube channel. We will drop a link into the chat for that. We're going to be together for about 45 minutes or so. And before I bring out our expert today, Gary Gentilucci, the Director of Landscape Management, I've got a few things I want to share. The first is that I've got some sort of strange flashlight that appears on my head. So I'm just going to twist this and see if I can move it a little bit so you don't have to keep looking at that. There we go. All right. So step one accomplished. And step two. I want to share a few quick tips on how to use Zoom. You can use the chat feature to say hello and comment. You can use the Q&A feature to ask any questions. And I have some colleagues on the back end who'll be answering questions as we go. But if you have specific questions for Gary about his work, you can drop them into the Q&A, and then we'll have a formal Q&A at the end. And if you do say hello in the chat, make sure you click all panelists and attendees to make sure that everyone can see your comment. All right, so you probably know the Central Park Conservancy. You are here, and we're very thankful for that. We are the nonprofit that is tasked with taking care of Central Park. We take care of the restoration, the preservation, and the ongoing maintenance. We preserve and celebrate Central Park as a sanctuary from urban life, from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all. Since 1980, the Central Park Conservancy has worked tirelessly to restore the park after years of decline and mismanagement. And one thing about restoration is that when you restore something, you have to maintain it. And that's a lot of what we'll be talking about today. I want to start very far back. I want to start in the 1850s, actually, and just give you a little history as to why Meadows and Central Park are important. They are indeed open grassy fields, but they're far more than that. So Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux, they designed Central Park in the 1850s, and meadows were really integral to that design. They called their plan the Greensward Plan, which after all means grass-covered ground. They designed the Sheep Meadow, the North Meadow, and the East Meadow specifically, but of course Central Park has grassy knolls and hillsides all around. One reason that meadows were important is because they offered visual and experiential contrast between the other major landscapes, those being parkland and woodland. And Olmsted and Vaux also believed that meadows in open fields were good for the soul, especially for mid-19th century New Yorkers. This is a quote from Olmsted. The meadow would give freedom and repose, which would be refreshing and tranquilizing to the visitor coming from the confinement and bustle of the crowded streets. Originally, most of them were used for passive recreation, and some still are. Sheep Meadow is the premier sunbathing space in all of Manhattan. And now some have, of course, evolved to include active recreation, like the North Meadow, which has baseball fields all throughout it. In the 1970s and 1980s, much of Central Park fell into disrepair, and the lawns followed suit. So when the Central Park Conservancy was created in 1980, Central Park boasted a significant amount of dust bowls. And with state-of-the-art planning and management practices, the Conservancy has brought back those beautiful pastoral meadows, really just as Olmsted and Vaux intended. And thankfully, we don't have to use horse-drawn mowers anymore, which you'll see in the document on the right-hand side. We have a little bit more technology now than we did before. All right, so I want to go ahead and take this opportunity to invite Gary to turn on his camera and to turn on his microphone. Gary is the Director of Landscape Management here with the Conservancy. Hi, Gary.
Hello.
So I want to go ahead and start by asking you to introduce yourself, tell us your name, your job, and describe your role here with the Conservancy.
Sure, right. Gary Gentilucci, Director of Landscape Management. Been working with the Conservancy for 9 years. Started as the turf care supervisor 9 years ago. So my role, I work with managers maintaining the landscapes throughout the park. I work with the turf care manager and the turf care staff, and I work with our section management. So basically, the park is managed. The landscapes are managed where we break the park geographically up into sections, right? So the lower third of the park is a section where there'll be a manager and a staff that'll take care of that area. The northern end will have a section that the staff takes care of that area. So it just kind of helps us organize the general care for the lawns, the landscapes, all the work that the landscape staff will do, which includes, maintaining the areas around the playgrounds, the pathways, the planting beds, all that, associated work that's there.
And that actually brings me to a great question and a clarification that I think is very important is, you're the Director of Landscape Management. So you oversee, tons of people. And we have different people who specialize in different things, but really there's an incredible amount of knowledge across the Conservancy. But you have a crew, the turf care crew. We're talking about Meadows today, but turf care is bigger than Meadows, correct?
That's right. Yeah, no. So the turf care staff basically consists of, eight or so individuals where they're able to focus on just what we're talking about, taking care of the lawns and landscapes, and especially the larger areas. I talked about the section staff, how they work along, managing the lawns as well. So if you can think about it, right, lawns that are, greater than an acre in size, the turf care staff is going to run the tractors and the mowers that kind of take care of those surfaces, right? And the section staff is going to take care of the areas that are, smaller in size, where they operate more handheld type of equipment, walk behind type of equipment. But yeah, other surfaces, right? We call it turf care, but you have a picture here of the infield, right? The same machines that can level and smooth turf areas when we do renovations or restorations can be used on the infields. So the same type of equipment is used to grade the infields, and that's a shared responsibility again of the turf care staff and the section staff. And then you also have a picture of this is up at the reservoir. This is the running track that goes around the reservoir. We have the bridle trail that runs throughout the whole entirety of the park. So again, that same equipment that can grade the infields, we use similar type of equipment maintaining these soft surfaces. There's the plaza down at the south end of the park by the main monument. That's another soft surface that the turf care staff has that responsibility. And then really, when you talk about surfaces, and it's just interesting, I'll just kind of throw it out there, like that some of those tractors and mowers that we use to maintain the turf surfaces, the turf care staff actually puts brooms and brushes on them, and the surfaces, including the pathways and the perimeter sidewalk, are maintained to the aspect of snow removal with some of that equipment. So yeah, it's just because the staff's called the turf care, department. There's a lot of other responsibilities besides the turf, the turf areas that they work in.
Yeah, it's sometimes they say that if you're going far, you have to travel like boat, plane, and car. And here you have someone who might start the morning on dirt and then go to grass and then go to gravel and then go to snow removal. So it's a pretty big wealth of knowledge to have. And
yeah, they're talented operators that can operate a lot of different equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we're going to see some of that equipment, all of which is crazy to me because at best I've used a push mower and not particularly well. But I want to go back to kind of the founding of the Conservancy. I know a little bit before your time, but we all know that the Conservancy was founded because Central Park had faced so much decline and mismanagement over the years. And in the 1980s, our beautiful lawns, like we just saw the Great Lawn, they were called Dust Bowls. And there's a very good reason for that. It's because we lost a lot of grass. So would you do me a favor and just kind of describe the conditions of some of our lawns and meadows at the time of the birth of the Conservancy?
Sure. You know, you could see it. There it is. And again, me and you weren't there, but you know, you hear the stories of basically it was just love to death, right? I think that's the saying that a lot of people like to say, right? So people were out there, they're able to use those areas. But unfortunately, there might not have been the resources to be able to care for and maintain those areas. So again, you know, a large part of what we do here is work, you know, when these areas were able to be restored, you know, when the Conservancy were able to put big projects together and, you know, restore the area, meaning putting in drainage and irrigation, is coming up with a management plan. What do we need after it looks good to help prevent it from falling back to what we're looking at, you know? And that it requires resources, it requires staff scheduling and timing to go out there and do some of the practices that we'll talk about. You know, mowing on a regular basis is an important thing, and not being able to do that, you're going to challenge the turf to be able to survive, and it will go from green to something like that. It's going to take time, but it can happen if you just don't do the simple things of just mowing at appropriate times. You could start your way back to something like that.
Mm-hmm. You know, thinking back on, because the Conservancy didn't manage to get rid of all these dust bowls in a year. I mean, it's an incredible process. The park is, 843 acres. It's a lot of ground to cover and a lot of projects to do. Have you, in your time here at the Conservancy, have you dealt with bringing an area of a lawn back from a sand pit to a grassy knoll?
Sure, for sure. 9 years ago when I started, basically East Meadow, that was the end of the restoration of East Meadow, where, just like I was talking about, the irrigation was placed in below ground, the drainage was improved, the soils were amended, the pathways were redone. You know, so I've been here for parts of projects like that as grand as East Meadow, but also I'll say year in and year out, the section staff, this is kind of, our challenge is basically to recognize when some of these lawns that don't have the below ground irrigation, they don't have the drainage, but, we could just go in there and, look at an area basically and say, well, we can't fix it all, but can we do something over in this area to kind of stabilize that soil, get some grass to grow over there, get it to be established so you don't have erosion and washout. So yeah, it's still occurring in many areas, not in what we would, consider, like you're saying, the ball fields and the meadows, but throughout the park, it's currently happening. So yeah, grand scale is East Meadow. There was another one that was done over on the west side 3 or 4 years ago. So yeah, it's still currently happening, but it's really happening even on a smaller scale, where we're just talking, a couple hundred square feet in these lawns, things like that. Yeah.
So I have one, I want to talk a little bit about the categorization of lawn, because I think it's something really interesting, but I have one other question that's kind of general, but like you mentioned erosion. Why is grass important?
Yeah, just for that very reason, right? What's beautiful about grass, right, from a guy who really enjoys it, is it's a perennial, right? So it's able to be there and last throughout the year, right? We also know there's annual plants, right? We plant flowers in the spring and they die at the end of the year, right? So having these large expanses, the importance of having a perennial cover there, you have the roots, you have the above ground structure that protects the soil from washing away, from being exposed and actually washing away. So that's definitely one of the, characteristics of turf that is really important, for maintaining these areas.
It's also beautiful. It's soft. It's got a pretty big menu of positives.
Yeah.
So I have in front of us 4 different areas of the park, and each one has a letter, A, B, C, D. Would you tell us what are we looking at, just as in regards to kind of letter grades, or not grades, that's not fair, letter categorizations?
Yeah, there are different categories. And, generally, what we're talking about is the quality of the lawn when we talk about the letters, and the categories of the lawn, A being the highest quality lawn. And when we mean quality, really, we're just talking about consistency and density and cover, just like what we're talking about, So our categorization, we're looking for these, what the expected quality of the lawn is. And then also, what is the acceptable level of turf loss, for lack of better words, right? Plants are living beings just like me and you, and they get stressed, and the same way I was talking about flowers, and you plant annuals and sometimes they dry out and they don't rebound, right? The same things can happen to lawns and turf, right? That we can have turf loss. There's just natural stresses through no one's fault. This is what happens. So again, when we categorize the lawns, these A lawns are lawns that are actively used. There's a high quality and expectation of what's going to be out there. You can see it's the sports fields there. It's just like you said, it's sheep meadow where there could be thousands of people there on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon. So and what follows that is the maintenance that's required, right? So the frequency of maintenance that's required, right? Again, if you want a higher quality lawn, chances are you're going to have to do more things to it, and that is what we're talking about: mowing, irrigating with water, sometimes fertility additions, and aeration is really important too in lawns that are actively used, right? So that you're loosening up the soil from people being out there. So then, if we're looking at this, right, A is a picture of the Heckscher ball fields. That's what we know is our highest quality lawn. We really don't want to lose the turf out there because people are expecting to go out there and play baseball and not have, erosion happening or soil exposed that can interfere with the game. B, next to that, right, that's what we call Frisbee Hill. It's the 72nd Street cross drive. Again, it's used very similarly to sheep meadow, but we know basically because that lawn may not have the irrigation that sheep meadow has, right? I know this. People don't know this, but right, the people who work here know this, that, sheep meadow has automatic irrigation. The lawn we're looking at there at Frisbee Hill has what we would call manual irrigation, where the staff sets up hoses and sprinklers to keep that one actively growing. So just by knowing what resources you have available to take care of that lawn may weigh into like what our expectations for the quality that we can maintain in that lawn. So that's kind of going through like an A and a B lawn and what the qualities are. And then you see like this other one's the C lawn, right? That's Cherry Hill. And if people are familiar with the park, that's a very popular tourist spot, right? And you can see people are actually out there using the lawn and sitting there on blankets. But a lot of the time, and really in a few more weeks, right, it's called Cherry Hill, and there's there's a fountain over there, but there's also cherry trees, and those cherry blossoms happen over there. So the main focal part of that landscape there is really the cherry trees, and you could equate that to the mall and the elm trees, so the lawn is not the focus. It's not the primary focus of the use of that landscape, where the ball fields, Heckscher ball fields, obviously the primary focus of use is playing ball out there. Or Frisbee Hill or sheep meadow. Like Frisbee Hill, we have film fests out there where people are sitting on the lawns and using them. So, again, our expected quality of the lawn at Cherry Hill, it's okay if there's if it's not so consistent. That's what I'm saying, that there's some spots that are thinned out. There are some spots where there's, weeds. Weeds are acceptable. We can talk about that later, but it's like that's what's there. And then the D lawn, this is interesting, right? Because this area I think is recognized as a D lawn, but actually now it's categorized as an A lawn. That's the landscape that I was referring to earlier. It's 86th Street to 90th Street on the west side of the park. where given a restoration took place and there are different resources available to take care of that lawn and expected use of that lawn no longer is a D lawn as pictured. It is that we will maintain to an A lawn, which will change the frequency of our mowing. It'll change the times we're aerating in there. It'll factor into the work that we're doing out there to keep it looking the way it looks.
And as luck would have it, I have a before and after of this lawn. Because the fact that it used to be a D lawn, it's now an A lawn, and you can kind of see this is it prior to what, when was it restored?
2017, I believe it was restored. In 2018, I think we started using it.
And so what we're looking at is basically the grass has been thinned out to, it is not grass, it's dirt.
Exactly. These are the dust bowls we're talking about, basically, right? And, you know, what we're saying when we're talking about D lawns and expected quality is, you know, we know, you know, we didn't talk about this, right? But there's 300 acres of lawns at the park, right? And we know we can't maintain, given our abilities and our staffing levels and everything being equal.
The fact that we're human.
Exactly. We can't maintain all the lawns at an A level, or do we have the desire to? So we know, you know, there are going to be these areas where, okay, they're not used as frequently. They're not used for certain things. They're in out of the way areas. We don't have to put our time and resources and energies into it. Or we know we do want to keep that open through the winter. This is a big part of why lawns wind up looking like this. They're actively used in the wintertime, right? And we want to allow people to actively use lawns in the wintertime. But what happens in the wintertime is, right, the grass goes dormant, it's not growing, and that active use can literally rub it away, right? So we allow that. We know that's okay. We want people to be out there, but we need to have a management plan for what are we going to do about it. And that's what I was talking about when you were asking about, like, are there places that are still like this and that have been in my time frame? Like, yeah, there's a lot of what I would call D lawns that are like this. But what we do is, you know, we work and we schedule and figure out, yep, this year we're going to work on those and kind of bring them back. Or, you know, just have this program in place so that we, you know, you can't get to them all, but on a rotation you're getting to them. But this one in particular, you know, there was the desire to kind of, you know, get it back, because really what this area is used for is a lot of school groups, right? Just very comparable to East Meadow, in the same way East Meadow went under the restoration 9 or 10 years ago. This was 2 or 3 years ago. Knowing that, you know, we want a higher quality of lawn there, it's going to take kind of like a reboot, right? And that's what happened here, where our planning, design, construction team went in, just like I was saying earlier, works on the drainage, amends the soil, make sure the catch basins water can go through and flow and get out, get rid of the silt, work on the pathways, put irrigation in and water. I'm talking a lot about that, I'm not explaining it, but really what it means is they put, you know, in this area over here, they put pipes below ground and there's sprinklers below ground. So it's got automatic irrigation. That's one of the, what, you know, again, it's not like what we do to the lawn, but it's one of the criteria that will say, like, if you want an A lawn here, we need to have automatic irrigation, right? We need to have these tools because we know it's going to get used. We're not going to just have it sit there and look pretty. And what's important about irrigation is you're keeping the grass actively growing, right? So the school groups can go out there, you know, in June when the rains might shut off, but we can still water it at night, keep it actively growing, and that quality stays up there.
Yeah, and I want everyone to focus their attention on the building on the left side, because when I click the screen, that's going to be our continuity. So this is the lawn today. So obviously through that restoration, I mean, an incredible restoration, you can already see that the care and quality that goes toward an A-lawn is very apparent now here at this spot.
Yeah. Yeah, so that lawn will get, you know, mowed once a week. It gets aerated 4 times in the season. You know, it has these maintenance practices that happen out there that will not occur on, say, B or C lawns. It's just a higher frequency that we have to go out there. We actually overseed it. You know, when it starts to thin out, we'll throw seed on top of it. We won't do that to all other areas. And the reason why we're able to do that here is because we know we have the irrigation to help that seed germinate and grow. Otherwise, you may be just throwing that seed in an area where there's no water that you can provide it as on a frequent basis to allow it to grow over here. So that's a big management strategy moving forward with this lawn. It's going to be actively used. And we know it's not that large. It's not as big. It's a little challenging, right? You see all the shade there, which sun's a good thing, right? That's what plants want to make photosynthesis. So this is a challenging area. It's not as big as East Meadow. It's not as large as Sheep Meadow. It's only a few acre site. So that all that use can be concentrated in an area. So to keep it actively growing is really important.
Yeah, and all the lawns that we've seen thus far in these images, I mean, they're beautiful. They're emerald green, and regardless A, B, C, D, the lawns of Central Park are incredible spaces. But emerald green is not necessarily. Some of them aren't all the time, and you already mentioned it a little bit. Is that plants go dormant or grass goes dormant? So this is the great lawn in the winter, and I just think that that's a really valuable piece of information, is that if the grass is brown, it's not necessarily that anything is wrong with the grass. The grass is just going through a period.
Yeah, when I talked earlier before, I talked about quality. I didn't really talk about the color. Like, color doesn't necessarily weigh into the quality, but we're talking about a quality. We're talking about the density and the consistency of the lawn. And just like you're saying, it's good. It's good that this lawn actually turns brown in the wintertime and shuts down, and you want it to do it the right way. If it doesn't do it the right way, it could be susceptible to what they would call winter injury. So even when the grass goes a little bit brown in the summertime, it may not be a bad thing. But what's important is you do keep some life in that grass, basically, right? You got to keep what they call, it's the crown, it's the growing point. That's what needs to stay alive and survive. And I'm talking now into the summertime when it goes dormant. So that is important to be able, yes, I follow what you're saying. Green is not always good. Brown is okay, but there is also a point where you do have to be a little bit concerned when things are being actively used and going dormant, because that is when, like I'm saying, they can actually get rubbed away. But that's different than the color. That's different than the color.
Yeah, which explains why in the winter lawns, some of them are closed, is because the grass cannot sustain the amount of people who might be on that lawn and still come back the next year.
Exactly.
So we use, you mentioned earlier some of the equipment that the turf care team utilizes, and I have a few options here. We have, looks like a push mower, even though it's bigger than any push mower I've ever used. We're dragging some kind of fencing across the ground. Yep. We have something that looks like a terrifying steamroller on the left side. What are these various kind of instruments that we're seeing, and what are they used for? Sure,
right. The top left, that's what I was calling a walk behind mower. And again, this is a great example of showing how it's a team that takes care of the lawns. That individual there works in the sections, how I was talking about. They do the general landscape care in the sections. So they don't only just take care of the lawns, they do a lot of other work. But one of their responsibilities is to mow these smaller lawns. And you can see that lawn there has a fence. It's probably just a few hundred square foot. And you couldn't get the machine that's on the lower right corner into that lawn, right? So what you got to do is size the piece of equipment for the size of the lawn. And when we talked about the turf care department or the turf care team of 7 or 8, that's the equipment they operate, right? Those are 11 foot wide, so they can cover a lot of land in a short amount of time. But I can tell you this, even being that wide, right? I'm not sure what, it's hard to tell because there's just really grass there in that picture, but like that machine will mow sheep meadow, it'll mow anything that's over than an acre in size, basically. Even with it being 11 foot wide, like I was saying, that'll still take 4 hours plus to mow through sheep meadow, so it's going to take time. You really could add it up, and that's why you have to have that kind of like what you're saying, that dedicated staff that can focus on making sure they're getting through those mowings. Because in the springtime it becomes really challenging. It rains and you miss a day or two. You might not want to be out there when it's soaking wet to do this, so you really need to be able to focus on that and do that. So yeah, those are just 2 different types of mowers that are used in the park. And really, there's probably, we could have a slide of I don't know, maybe at least a half a dozen, maybe 9 different types of mowers that we use in the park. But those are 2 really good examples that cut a lot of grass actually in the park. The machine on the right, right, that's, it's a utility cart, but it's dragging what we call a drag mat, basically. And chances are that's occurring after someone had overseeded that lawn and even aerated it where they pulled up soil. There's different kinds of aerations. But what they're doing there is trying to move the seed and break up the soil that they just spread across that lawn, and have it, settle in so that it can actually germinate and grow. So that's what's happening over there. And again, that's the section staff. That's the work that they're doing. There's actually larger ones that are behind tractors, very similarly, that the turf care staff might use, again, out at the Great Lawn or something like that. And then, that's the tractor, to the bottom left, and that's an aerator. That one is actually called, it's a vertidrain, and it's a solid tine, right? So there's different types of aeration that we do. But what that does is it basically pokes a hole in the ground. It doesn't remove the soil, like I was saying, that might be happening up in the other one where they're dragging it. So it's just punching a hole in the soil. It's opening it up so that water can get in, air can get in, and there's a little bit of space there for the roots to grow. So yeah, that's like you said, it's a it could be a scary looking machine because it's driving spikes into the ground. But that machine, and there's another one, the importance of them, I think that's at Heckscher ball fields. The importance of them for the Ailons cannot be understated, because that really, like I'm saying, we always see what's up top. What really important is what's down below, right? Because that's what sustains the grass that's up at the top. So keeping the soil loose and able, not compacted, so like I'm saying, the roots can grow down there and the air and the light can get down there is really, really important. So yeah, that's a tractor mounted aerator, I guess.
Yeah, I remember talking to you earlier, and I asked if like any of our team used those, because I feel like they're like spikes on the bottom of shoes that to aerate. And it's just looking at these images now, it's kind of hilarious to think that anyone anywhere in Central Park could aerate foot by foot. Another machine are these. Well, we have a push one, and then we have a very large tractor. Spreading sand, I think.
Sand, exactly. And now this is pretty intense. And again, this is happening on both. This is an intense level of maintenance. And this is happening on both these areas would be considered Ailons, basically. So what we're doing is we'll get to a point, hopefully talk about like our fall restorations. They're really, really important for maintaining that high quality, that density of the turf. So after you aerate, after you punch these holes in the ground, you spread sand, right? So some of that sand's able to fall into those holes. We actually take that same drag mat that you saw before, we'll drag that around so it'll help move it around. So it's doing lots of things. They call this top dressing. The one on the left is actually on our bowling greens. We actually have bowling and croquet greens. And again, those surfaces, you imagine, it's not like a putting green, but it's close. You want them smooth and true to roll. So that's why that's happening over there. You can drag it around and it takes out the highs and the lows and kind of keeps it level. It also breaks up thatch, by it just filtering down into the thatch. It allows, more microbial activity. It allows the earthworms to come up. It allows that's how the thatch is basically broken down. And then just to get back to the larger machine, while we're using that down at Heckscher, is there's some of these areas that that even though we're aerating them and we're trying to loosen up that soil, they don't drain so well. So by putting sand on the top, sand, right? Think about the beach, right? Sand drains very fast. The water comes up from the waves, it goes right down through and the sand's exposed. If you have a clay or a heavy soil, that water's not going to go away so fast. So what we're trying to do here is actually lighten, what they call it is lightening up the soils up at the top. And this is going to be important come next season, besides filling those holes and kind of modifying that soil there. You're creating this surface that actually dries out faster. And that allows people to be out there when it rains at night and they want to be out there the sunny day right after it happens. If you're able to do practices like this, it aids in shortening that time period up. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's really, really important, but it's a high level of maintenance. we certainly could not do this, you know, and we don't actually. A lot of times this is just targeted to areas that we know don't drain well. We're not doing this to all 14 acres of sheet meadow. We may focus it on certain areas we know that may puddle and not. And that's exactly what we're doing down there at Hextra that one year. We were targeting at these areas. Yeah. Specialized equipment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really.
So we have top dressing, and then the next slide is about watering. And we've talked a little bit about watering already. But I just want to ask, I mean, this is clearly, you know, we have a section staffer who's turning on sprinklers. We get water through rain, we get water from these sprinklers, but you mentioned that we have some lawns, Ailons particularly, that are automatic sprinklers, like sheep meadow. Would you describe briefly how would you describe the irrigation system under sheep meadow?
Yeah, so sheep meadow is, like I was saying before, it's 14 acres. And there are literally below ground sprinklers that pop up, you know, and some people may see them when they're out there laying their blanket, but I can tell you this, sometimes it's hard to actually find them, right? Because they really do just fall right below the top level of that grass. So there's below ground sprinklers, and then we have a pump station that sits by the cafe that's there. So, you know, to operate the sprinklers, you need the pressure to be a little bit higher than your normal pressure that goes into the, you know, into your homes and houses and the buildings all around here. So it's called a booster pump. It boosts the pressure. So it takes it, you know, from 50 to 60 PSI up to about 80 PSI. And that's what allows the sprinklers that are on electric valves, right? So when an electric valve opens up, the water can flow through. It's at a higher pressure, and 5 or 6 sprinklers in a zone will run, right? And that'll water a little area of sheep meadow. And to put it in context, there's literally 90 zones of 5 or 6 sprinklers that come up at sheep meadow to keep it green, right? So that's, you know, that's a lot of electric valves. It's 90 electric valves that, you know, you don't have to necessarily service them all every year, but you do have to monitor them and maintain them because they do want to not work, right? Certain things happen. So you have to go below ground, find those valves, fix them, and then the zones will pop back on. So it's a pretty intense, you know, system there for, you know, just watering the grass, where you can see here that this was Frisbee Hill. That's what I was saying. Like, that's the difference between sheep meadow and Frisbee Hill. You know, not saying if you just put below ground sprinklers there, automatically you have that quality of lawn, but no, you know, the expectation could be a little bit different, you know. So that's the hose and the sprinkler that you're not going to have. What's the challenging thing with that is, I was talking about uniform and consistency. It's hard to get uniform and consistency with something like that. When you have these below ground sprinklers that are on set distances apart from each other, you really can I'm trying to think of the right word. You could just really accurately put out the kind of water you want to put out. Because again, water is not a thing where more is better. And in fact, we desire to use as little as water possible. You know, we're just watering to kind of keep the grass growing. Rather, Mother Nature take care of it through the rains. And that's what it's called. It's called supplemental irrigation. That's what you want it to be. You want it to be supplementing the rains. It's not, you know, the weather warms up and you want to turn these things on. You really do want to actively manage them and turn them down and turn them off when they don't need to. And in fact, our system, right, it's an automatic irrigation system. It's controlled through these valves, these pipes, everything below the ground. It does go to a central computer, right? So we have these all throughout the park in the 9-10 different locations. The turf care team, again, has access to that computer, and that is actually even set to a weather station. So if we have a thunderstorm or something like that at night, it can actually turn the irrigation off for that evening, while if you went home, you wouldn't be able to do that. So it's really, you know, state of the art, automated, high level of maintenance, takes a lot of monitoring and management to keep it performing optimally. You know? Yeah.
So you mentioned that top dressing the sand is one way that we try to mitigate some puddling or places that don't drain very well. I want to briefly talk about how we mitigate other weather issues. I mean, right there you have, if it's raining and storming, our sprinkler systems can turn off. But otherwise, during periods of heavy rain, what are some of the things that we do? Do we have to do anything when it snows, considering we just had like 19,000 feet of snow dump on New York? I guess let's hone in there, rain and snow.
Yeah. Well, you see the red flag on the left, right? You know, unfortunately, right, when it does rain and there's puddles and standing water at the top, what that does is it makes the lawn susceptible to compaction at the surface, which is our enemy, right? That's why we aerate the machine. We run that aerator to break that up. So there are times when it's really saturated. That's what we call it. When the ground is saturated, it's susceptible to this compaction. You know, we're gonna try to keep people from actively using those lawns. It's just it's more inclined to damage as well. You know, it could get rutted. We don't operate our machines out there. You know, that you went and drove a mower out there, you wind up rutting the lawn, you know. So you just have to pause for a minute, let nature take its course, and then you're able to get back out there. You know, snow is it's kind of a blessing sometimes. Actually, it is. It's considered a blanket, you know. So when you have snow on top of a lawn, you know, we talked about brown is good, but what happens also is, right, this happens with plants besides lawns, right? When there's winds and cold temperatures and heavy sun, you actually desiccate the leaves. That's part of the reason why they turn brown on the lawn, right? It's shut down, it's gone dormant, but there's no more, it's desiccated, it's dry. This is a blanket, so it actually keeps the sun from coming off, you know, hitting down on the ground. And it keeps the wind from going across it. So a little bit of snow sometimes isn't a bad thing. And in fact, right, when it's greater than 6 inches, we do open up the lawns in a lot of areas to allow people to go cross-country skiing out there, build snowmen, do whatever they want to do out there, because it's actually protecting the lawn from damage. The challenge becomes when it melts away, right? When it melts away and it's kind of nice, and like you said, we went through this a few weeks ago, to be out there, that's when you can start to get into that, we just call it wear damage. You know, if you're sledding and there's the ground, it's the temperature, it's sunny, the ground is warming up, you know, you can really damage the lawn just by going across that it's the snow's not there to protect it anymore. You know, so that's the balancing act there, is when can the use in the snow kind of curtail to an end, basically. Yeah.
And speaking of use, I think that when we think about lawns in Central Park, you know, that's what we think about is using them. So you mentioned earlier that Sheep Meadow gets busy, and you know, this picture, it's pre-pandemic, so no one is wearing a mask. But I will say that this is a Sunday or a Saturday in the middle of summer. Honestly, on a Sunday in the middle of summer, you might have double these people. I'm surprised there's so much open green space because Sheep Meadow's packed. So thinking about people, I mean, we want the lawns beautiful for people, and then people are there. What is that interplay?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing and again, you're right, we want people to use the lawns. There's no doubt about it. We love to see this. This is why we do all the hard work we do. The one thing we'd ask, right, is when we're leaving, just take what you brought there, basically, right? That's the biggest thing that's going to kind of affect our operation. We talked about, you know, mowing, you know, Sheep Meadow, when it's growing a lot in May, we need to mow it twice a week, basically, to try to, you know, not cut too much off. So if we have to stop in the morning and clean up a lot that was left behind, it really becomes challenging to get that done. Just like I said, it takes 4 hours just to do the mowing. If you're spending a few more hours picking up the trash, all of a sudden your day's gone and that's all that you got done, you know, where you could have spent that time doing something else. The other thing I'd say that's really, really important, almost everyone really knows it, but it happens. And I think a lot of times it's just because people aren't familiar with it, is blankets are good. Cloth, natural blankets are good, but tarps and plastic, it is amazing. You could see sometimes they get used out there by accident, where it's a plastic, you know, those blue tarps that get laid out, and it's a nice, bright, sunny day. It'll burn the grass that's down below it. And it won't take more than a few hours that you'll see that square effect of what was laid out there. You know, so there's some of that. And people will even ask more frequently, there's these inflated type
The couches?
Yeah, like those couches and stuff again. Where again, we want people to use the lawns and stuff, but really out there, since that's made of that plastic type material, it can heat up real fast and actually set the lawns back. So again, using them maybe on some of these other lawns and not out on a lawns is the balancing act that we have to have there. And then just generally understanding that unfortunately we do have to close them sometimes when it rains. Like that's but it's so that they can be opened up more often, right? That's the idea of that. So those simple things would really help us, to help keep Sheep Meadow in the shape that it's at. Yeah.
I want to grab ask one more question, and then I want to grab some questions from the audience. So this picture, I actually am curious, what kind of grass seed do we use? And do we use the same grass seed all over the park?
That's a good question. So, right, this is East Meadow. And no, we do not use the same grass seed all over the park, right? We have at least 4 or 5 different kinds of species of grass is what we call them, right? So there's Kentucky bluegrass that we use basically on a lot of the athletic fields. There's perennial ryegrass. Both of those will do really well in the full sun, but they got different characteristics, and we'll choose different ones for different areas. The perennial ryegrass that I just mentioned versus the Kentucky bluegrass, right? One thing that's really interesting about those two, I basically said they both get used on the athletic fields. Well, Kentucky bluegrass seed takes 3 weeks to germinate, right? So we'll use that when we can seed at a good time in September when we're doing those restorations and those renovations. Perennial ryegrass will germinate in 3 days. So 3 weeks versus 3 days. So when the soccer fields start thinning in November, for sure, we're going to use perennial ryegrass out there because it actually will grow and fill in a little bit where some of those areas are thinning out. Where if we threw Kentucky bluegrass out there, it took 3 weeks, you're in December and the grass is dormant, right? So yeah, what grass seed you're using is definitely targeted to different times. And then we use this is actually a mixture of bluegrass and tall fescue. Tall fescue is another species of grass, and then there's these fine fescues, and a lot of those actually tolerate less light situations, right? So we talked about that other one where I saw the shade that was over there with the trees, we might use some of these fine fescues and tall fescues in those locations. So yeah, it's there's a lot of grasses seed to choose from. They're all not the same, and we try to really target them to be used so that the lawn is the most successful it can be. And then the other thing is really like, it's amazing how grass, I can't think of the saying, but right, it's not your grandfather's grass, right? There's that saying or something, it's not your grandfather's old car or whatever it was. Like grasses are being developed, and the universities and the seed companies are, not only the species, they're doing these cultivated varieties, these cultivars that have what we were talking about, drought resistance and heat resistance, and what are some disease resistance and things like that. So we'll definitely try to select even specific to the species of what cultivar we're using if we know we have a problem in a certain area or something like that. Yeah.
I want to grab some questions from the audience, but I also want to say that this was an incredible amount of information, and I love how much, honestly, we all love grass. And I just want to say to everyone who's watching, you now have no excuses to have a beautiful lawn. So no brown spots, unless it's a good brown spot. I wanted to ask a few questions from the audience. I mean, here's one that we've kind of already touched on, but it's a little bit more targeted. Cedar Hill and some other good sledding spots took a beating this winter. Are we going to close them for the spring to reseed, or are those going to recover on their own?
It's so funny that they brought up Cedar Hill, because really I was talking with the section staff at Cedar Hill just a few days ago, because they're right on. They're here at the park. They know when we were talking about Cherry Hill, whoever asked that question, they know the park. Yeah. So chances are we're not going to actually keep it closed, but we are going to overseed it. We're going to do some aerations. We're going to try to get some grass in there. And people would ask why. It's why, we didn't get to talk about weeds and stuff, but right, you want to get the grass in there, like I was saying, because it's perennial and it'll give that cover for the year round. If we don't get to do that in some of those spots, the crabgrass and some of these annual grasses are going to They're going to compete with that grass, and then we know it's just going to look like that next year. So yeah, we're going to do a little bit of work in that area. I don't think we're planning on actually closing it down. Although, sometimes we do have to do that. We keep it closed just a little bit longer and then open it up. So, that's part of that management plan where we see what happened last year and we make the plans for the next year coming up.
And this is a question that I had and forgot to ask, but how high should grass be? And in Central Park, do we have different parameters for how high the grass should be in different spaces? How many inches?
Yeah, for the most part, we're really looking at 3 inches, right? That's an ideal thing. And what it is you just don't want to cut the grass too short, right? One thing that's unique about grass is you're able to cut it. It still doesn't like it, but you're able to do it, right? Because the growing point is down at the bottom of it. A lot of other plants, the growing points are at the top. You cut that and then the plant will stop growing. So 3 inches is an ideal cutting height for it. For the most part, we target most of the lawns like that. We do raise and lower it. If we get behind, we'll actually raise. Our machines can adjust heights. We'll actually raise, so we're not taking off too much at the same time. And then really for soccer, we might try to drop it down. In baseball, we might try to drop it down to 2 or 2.5 inches, not 2, but 2.5 inches, just because it does, since it is actively growing. If you're mowing it at 3 inches, by the time the kids are out there on the weekend playing, we don't want the grass to be too long, slowing down their ball, because it could actually affect them. So that's some of the feedback we've gotten with them. We try to keep some of them just a little bit shorter, but ideally you want to keep it at 3 inches. Just like I was saying, that allows the roots to grow. Kind of the shorter you grow the grass, the shorter you can expect those roots to be, which limits the amount of soil that can hold water for it to grow as well. So it's all kind of interrelated there. Yeah.
I was just thinking of, I don't know when the next time I'm going to play soccer is, but I'm going to use that excuse that the grass is actually too long and it's
That's right. See that we can help you gain. We can help you gain.
So but I got one more question for you. Someone asked, what can they do to keep their lawn Central Park green? Like, do you have any advice for more perhaps casual lawn owners?
The biggest thing I'd say, right, is if you are seeding, if you're trying to do any of that work, the fall is the best time, right? And also give it, try to loosen up, pay attention to the soil, right? It's not just about the seed that you're using, it's the soil. We didn't talk about it, but right, we take soil tests, on these lawns, especially if we're doing a major restoration or renovation. We're doing a lot of different kinds of soil tests, but just knowing what soil you have is going to affect the ability for that grass to grow. So yeah, 2 things: seed in the fall, take a soil test, and that should help you a little bit.
Gary, I want to thank you so much. This was incredible. I love learning about all the things and all the different levels and just the incredible expansive knowledge that we have here at the Conservancy. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time to share with us a lot about turf care. So thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I'm going to invite you to turn off your mic and camera, and I will close the program. I want to thank all of you for joining us here at Behind the Park, maintaining Central Park's expansive lawns. The Central Park Conservancy is a public-private partnership, which means we can't do our work without you. And just by joining us today, you're helping support our work by spreading the word about the things that the Central Park Conservancy does here for Central Park. If you enjoyed today's program, please consider becoming a member. You can also join us on one of our virtual programs. We do weekly walks every Wednesday and virtual tours and some other specialty programs. And we'd love to see you again for the next installment of Behind the Park. We are going to be talking about protecting Central Park's trees with Peter Hopt, who's the manager of tree care. On that note, from the Central Park Conservancy, stay safe and be well.